basically an introduction to Gemara. Gemara is the speaker of Torah. And I don't know if we're going to get through all of them, all the different things that we have here. The first thing is going to be the 15th Gemara. Then we're going to have what's on the Gemara page, and then the text of every Gemara. We're going to focus on the first one, which is the history of Gemara. So, very briefly, Torah, year 448, 1,500 years later. The dates that we are not exact. Generally, 1,500 years later. Exactly when this was. Reveal enough to complete the Chanaya. And then 312 years later, Mishnah called Chanaya. And then 312 years after that, that's when Rabbi and Rashi completed the Gemara. So just a couple of comments on that. First of all, Rabbi and Rashi, they passed away before this year, but until that year, basically, they allowed Christians to play through the Gemara. That were added by Zoin and after the days of Rabbi and Rashi. That's the date that's considered the full actually. Then finally, Rabbi Rashi and the Gemara are called on by running. So just to get a little better picture of the timeline, just go to another presentation for a moment. They have over here, Matan Torah is in the year 2448. Then you can see there's about 480 years of the Mishnah, and there's 410 years of Isishim, 70 years of the Gavas, 420 years of Sheni. That doesn't 1,500. That's 1,500 if you go a little before. I think 120 years after the Urban, 1,500 years from Matan Torah. So here you can see Matan Torah is over here, 1,500 years later, Mishnah, 312 years after. Okay, so when Hashem gave the Yid the Torah, I think that naturally what we think is there's a Torah, and then there's a Torah. A better way maybe to look at it is that just like you say Torah Shabbat, you're giving a qualifying, what part of Torah? Also Torah Shabbat is a qualifying description. There's Hashem gives the Torah. In the Torah, there's Torah Shabbat and Torah Shabbat, and Hashem gave both of them to Moshe Rabbeinu. They gave him the Torah Shabbat and Torah Shabbat. I think over here, I'm not going to go into it, but this is basically the button here. It's just that you could go and learn a little bit about Torah Shabbat, Torah, Promotion, Parshas, Sukkim, structure of the Truckim, different Parshas, 53 Parshas, basically information related to Torah Shabbat. So Hashem gives Moshe Rabbeinu Torah Shabbat and Torah Shabbat. Now, what exactly is Torah Shabbat? Torah Shabbat, we don't know. Very simple, straightforward. What's Torah Shabbat? And one way maybe to conceptualize it is somebody gives you right into a list of things to buy and store. Your mother gives you a list of things to buy and store. 10 tomatoes. Sorry, tomato, plum tomato. That, so to speak, is understood. And it's also understood that it's English. It's not the same exact thing, but also in Torah there is the written part and then there is the Baal Peh part. There's different reasons given for why it's done this way. One sort of simple reason is not so much people that if everything was facade, everything was on their own. The moment you perish off that, you can't be the only. The people were right for themselves, they're allowed to write for themselves. That's to remember. But all the learning had to happen with articulated, spoke. It's going to be from a text, so it has to be from a person. That's a very sort of simple, not this is the real reason for it. Simple reason for it. So what's in Torah Shabbat? Torah Shabbat, a lot of this was there was said about the shop also that he wasn't put it, that it would be a good thing to the basic thing part that's the Rabbi of right. Almost all the statements here. There's also a letter from Shebeal. I don't remember the exact places, but I think it was a city of Khartoum, I think it's called. And the rabbi in the city over there wrote a letter to Shebeal that the Khartoum, those who were having a gaining power. The Shebeal he wrote him. He asked him to write a letter to explain to them the Torah as part of the Torah. There's a lot of information here as well. So the Rambam says the Rambam breaks it up into 5 and 8 and 4. Number 1, there is halacha l'meshul. We'll get it. Then a lot of these things are just things that I'm using. There's a limit of football. That terminology is not used anywhere. We'll go through all things. Then there's the midas that the Torah is precious to him. Then there are upstairs. Let's see what. So halacha l'meshul is Sinai. Basically, when Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu that Shartam was on Yom Tov, he didn't tell him where exactly the head. He didn't tell him that it had to be a square box. He didn't tell him it had to be black. It's not the right thing. So how do Moshe Rabbeinu get that? That was said about that. And there's no hint for it anywhere in the Torah. Nothing at all. That's the Rambam basically. Whoever says halacha l'meshul Sinai, it means it's not going to come from Moshe Sinai or something else. It means that there is no source for it whatsoever except the oral tradition. That's the entire basis. And he gives examples, numerous examples. One of them that he gives is that the Torah has examples. But Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, it says in Shai the box that he put it into, told him a lot of things about it. One of the things he told him is it has to be cheap. There's no hint anywhere in the Torah. Then there's another type of thing that's in the law of tonight, which is I'm calling it a little bit of a football. The point makes it that you could find it in the Torah. It's not written clearly. You could find a limit for it in the Torah. And it's what Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu. So an example for that is Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu create Sodom and the Rambam elaborates on it. He has arguments about everything in Torah. Nobody argues on create Sodom. Nobody argues that it exists an essence. Why? That's what Moshe Rabbeinu gave to Torah Shebeal. However, this is not. The Gemara is not going to call it a law of Sinai because there's a way to find it, hinted to, or alluded to in Torah. And so that's another part of Torah Shebeal. Now, what's unique about these two verses to the other one is that these are two things that Moshe Rabbeinu knew of. When Moshe Rabbeinu saw Rabbi Kiva Darshan, and he's so bad that he's teaching so many more things than he ever heard, it's not referring to these two things. Moshe Rabbeinu knew all of the mitzvahs that are included in these two categories told to him by Hashem. What that's referring to is we see in the next two categories. And these two categories are all Minatera. So, first two categories are teachings that Moshe Rabbeinu heard directly from Hashem. He told her Yeshua was cast. That's the Rambam gives 40 generations of Moshe Rabbeinu. Rashi saying that the teachings that went down all the way from Moshe Rabbeinu are included in these two categories. Now, in the third category, it's also Minatera. It's also a Minatera thing, but Hashem didn't tell the Moshe Rabbeinu. A good example would be you take a seed, you put it in the ground, or a child in the womb. The potential for everything that comes afterwards is there, but you can't really see it at the moment. You can't see anything. It sounds absurd that the seed will come out of a whole tree. But it's already there. It's not the Yesh Mayim, the creation of the seed. Afterwards, it's not Yesh Mayim. It's all. So, using that example over here, let's use an actual example. So, simple. The Torah says that a person is not allowed to marry their daughter's daughter. Torah does not say that you can't marry your daughter. So it's not written in the Torah, you can't marry your daughter. But it's considered awesome in a Torah for a person to marry their daughter. How's it in a Torah? Because it's one of the things that we have in the Torah are this is not all the Hoffinger is one that is given over to people. So the Hoffinger is if a person can marry their daughter's daughter. What's the reason? The person is very close to their daughter. So the person can marry the daughter herself. And that's considered also Minatera. So it's considered Minatera, but Moshe Rabbeinu was not necessarily aware of all these Lamudim. Because they weren't said, they were written, they weren't given to him all about that. They were tools to go and learn and develop it. So what comes out for you. And then, so that's, we have it here. These first three categories are all things that are Minatera. Now, the final category is really we get a lot of the teachings that we have today, both in Mishnah, Chanaya, and in Torah, which the Rambam breaks it up into there is one, the second. What is there? So you have examples here. Example of the zero is star 8 of olive. Actually, in this study, the 8 is so this also was accepted. So that's zero, which is the common ability to make the protect the person from the zero, right? Put the baby right into the bed, and not put it on the bed. Maybe it has something happen. Also, when it comes to doing it, engaging in terror, one of these work. lot of theories. I saw somewhere, I saw somewhere recently that what's certain is that these theories primarily down at the time of Bayesheni. Remember, when I showed you the time of the Mishnah was when we had Shaytim. The time of Bayesheni we had King and Nevi'im. And the Nevi'im, the King stopped by the Gulf when the base Mishnah was destroyed. But the Nevi'im continued throughout the Gulf. Then Bayesheni was already the Chanaya. So I saw somewhere that it was written that the reason the Nevi'im was the Chanaya had Nevi'im. And so the Nevi'im would always, direct them, correct them. They didn't have that anymore, so they had to have built into place in a more permanent way these theories. And then Takanas are things like that in other Machaveras. For example, here we have the example of a crucible. There's a lot of such Takanas that you need. But what's the Takana of a crucible? So the Takana of a crucible is the Torah says that Shemitah arrives, any loan that you have is absolved. The Torah also tells you that if somebody asks you for a loan, a year before Shemitah, 10-month loan, and you know that sometimes you trust the person who puts the money, not talking about that, you're ready to do the loan otherwise. All things aside, you'd be ready to do the loan. You want to let the person know you want to they need situation, the biggest stuff you want to come to a more difficult situation, you'd be ready to give the loan. Then you realize it's in 10 months that they, but 2 months after that is Shemitah. Now you don't suspect the person is doing it on purpose, that's not what I mean. But you know that the reality is that sometimes things don't work out, things they get pushed off a little bit, and then they'll lose the loan. The Torah says you can't say that because of that. That's what the Torah says. The reality is that people stop lending. They weren't worried. The Torah says don't stop lending, but people stop lending. And that created problems among the clients in terms of simply financial. So for Zal instituted a mechanism, the mechanism works for Torah, like selling your company. You don't own it anymore. It's not the church, it's really not yours. Just like the other person's company is not yours, this company is no longer yours. They formed a mechanism and they instituted that you're able to let the loan even after. So that would be in the category of the So there are generally two categories of group. Those things that are the theorists and then the other theorists. And these are all considered midrabanan. So the first two categories, just organized. The first two categories are both Torah and things that are called by Shebeal. He told me to write this, and then he told me information about what I wrote. The second one. So these are the first two. The third category is Torah, but it's something which has to be something brought out from the Torah. The Shebeal was not told to be. The third category are entirely midrabanan. Okay. So that's the thing for state Now let's move on. This is really the framework. This is really the framework for the rest of the parts over here. So the Mishnah was wrote the Shai 1,500 years later. It's after the Torah of Rabbi started dispersing around the world. Wrote down all of these things that we had before. What's written in the Mishnah? Compiled the Mishnah. It basically includes all of these things in Torah Shabbat that happened up to this time. Later on, there were additional other things, there were additional theories that were made, new things that came up. But all of these things that were around in the days of Rabbi 1,500 years after the Torah was given, are all included in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda, in a way, more comes before Mishnah. Just to point out, in the Mishnah, it said, it's been published after the Gemara. Gemara, we call the sacred Gemara, but Gemara is a way of learning that you get to the understanding of what's written there. So, for example, you can ask me, no, how many million? That still have to be cute. They can ask me, no, how many million? That 3 refers to an answer. But the other refers to a clear. You're going to say, what's the reason for the Minani million? That's about Torah. That's what business is from. Also to marry a daughter. What do we have? The answer is about the flavor. And it's going to bring down the statement and say, what's the basis for it? And say what it was. So the more really, in a way, for Mishnah, but in actuality, you're good enough to compile just the halacha. He actually pulled them halacha. That each one of the Mishnah Okay, so we have 200 from those 1,500 years. Torah Shebeal kept very large, and because of Hashem, they saw that people, the level of learning that was going on, still that it was weakening. There was concern that they were forgotten, really to the extent that we would, all the particulars that are in it, they were concerned about it being forgotten, and so Rabbi said from the pasuk in Tehillim, and you can write down Torah Shebeal. Just to point out, there are talks about this greater length, but that doesn't go into it over here in the presentation. But a brisa is also teaching from Matana. It's just like a Mishnah is teaching from Matana, but brisa is also teaching from Matana. The reason it's called brisa is because the word brisa means outside, the bar. It's outside of the Mishnah. Now, it doesn't mean that Rabbi didn't gather all teachings and he missed some of them. A brisa, in a way, the Rebbe actually brings it down to Maimer on Shavuos. When you look at Dalit, the Rebbe brings it down in a Maimer that the Rebbe talks about klal of prat. Why was the Torah given in klal and then prat? The Rebbe says the klal is Mishnah, the prat is Gemara. The Rebbe mentions over there that compared to the Mishnah, a brisa is considered elaborate with prat compared to the Gemara. And if you learn a lot of things, look at the Siddha, sorry? Chanaya. That's what I was alluding to before. That's not in the presentation. That's Rabbi, other students of Rabbi compiled concepts, prices, cross, free. Some of them are midrashim that relate more to, let's say, stories. Because the Torah has two things, right? You have halacha, so to speak, and then you have stories. Some of them relate more to stories and agadita. Some of them relate more to halacha. Cross the free are more halacha oriented. Who can argue? Right, so these are teachings from Torah, but if you look at the sifas, I don't know the number. Many sifas, and there makes a feel mahadran on the sifas, and the discussion is going to be that whatever is written in the Mishnah is written in the Brisa with more detail. You see that many times in the sifas. So the Brisa basically was left out on purpose because he already included in the Mishnah, but it was on a level that even some Tanoim, so to speak, struggled with it, and they felt the need to write it a little more at length. For us, obviously, that would still be considered tremendously written and short, but it was considered at length compared to the Mishnayos. Anybody has questions? Jump in. Okay, I'll jump into this thing over here. I think we've included, but there's moving along. So over here, there's a button here like we had by the Torah Shebeal. So I'll just go through it. What is it? So you have the Mishnah or Shas or Mishnayos. Within that, you have Starim. Within Starim, you have Mesechtas. Within Mesechtas, you have Prakim. With Prakim, you have a Mishnayos. Now, there are Shishas. Okay, let's see. So Shishas Starim, we know the Simon. There's Roy, Moed, Noshim, Zikin, Kach, and Paris. The Rosh Hashanah is Zman Nokat. There's actually another order. I don't remember what it is now offhand. It's a different order that some people have, and there's a different Rosh Hashanah for it. So let's see, we'll look a little bit at the Starim. So we have Zrayim, Moed, Noshim, Zikin, Kach, and Paris. So before we get into it, there's 63 Mesechtas. There's probably no meaning to this, but when I was putting it together, when you're putting it together, you notice things they wouldn't otherwise notice. I noticed when I did the Chamashim, we didn't really go through it. There's 5 Chamashim, 53 Parshiyas, and interestingly, there are 6 Starim and 63 Mesechtas. You find nothing meaningful to it, especially since when you look at the Parshiyas, if you actually count the Parshiyas, there are 54, not 53. Count the Parshiyas, it's not 53 Parshiyas, it's 54. It's Gan Sidrei Deraisa. There's different explanations. One of them is that Nitzavim and Vayela are really one Parsha that are sometimes divided into 2, as opposed to, let's say, Matis and Matzeh, that are 2 Parshas that are sometimes combined. And in a way, it makes sense. Look at the Nitzavim and Vayela, it's tiny. It makes sense that it's one Parsha. Also, I don't know if this is brought down anywhere, but it says that when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Monday or Tuesday, then we divide the Nitzavim and Vayela. Simon is Paf, Bag, Hamelech. That Hamelech, if Hamelech is on Bag, Bezer Gimel, then Paf, separate the Parshas, which sounds like they're one Parsha. Also, it's like the system needs to break something that's one into pieces. So it sounds like they're really one, and then you break them apart if Rosh Hashanah falls out on Monday or Tuesday. By the Mesechtas also, this is discrepancy. You know, it says it's 60 Mesechtas. We have over here 63. So there's different answers given. The one I think is that the Bavas are 3 Bavas are really one. So the dog, you minus 2, subtract 2. Take those 3, put them all into 1. You only have 1, you remove 2. The Rambam says that Makif and Sanhedrin are one Masechta. That's the answer the Rambam gives in the Gamal Kirsh Mishnayos. So as we'll see, the name of the Seder and the name of the Masechta reflects the content of the Seder Masechta. So I tell you which Seder it's in, you know the content. I tell you which Masechta, information about the content. So let's see. So you take Zrayim, you hear what it sounds like, things that are related to the land. The Rambam goes through, we're not going to go through here. I'm working on that presentation for that. The Rambam goes through all 63 Masechta. And there's a lot of different opinions in that regard. A lot of trying to give different explanations. So you look at them, you have Peah, Zmai, all things related to the land. Kilayim, Trumas, Maisras. Then we go to Moyed. So Moyed is halachas of Yom Tevim, things that are contained in time. So you start off with Shabbos, Eruvin, Psachim, Shtalim, Yuma, Sukkah, Beitza, Rosh Hashanah, Tainus, Megillah, so you have over there 12 Noshim at the least. It has 7 Seftas. Again, you can hear and see in the name what it talks about, things related to marriage. Let's go through them quickly. Then Ezekiel is things related to damages between people. The Rambam describes the difference between Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, and Bava Basra. So Bava Kama is when the interaction starts off with a problem. It starts off with Avodas and Ezekiel. Basically, a damage that occurs. These are the start of the interaction is with some sort of problem. But the Messias is the start of the interaction is not a problem. It's still like somebody found something or somebody deposited something by somebody, and then something developed afterwards. And Bava Basra says there's no negative interaction. It's just how do you deal with this monetary matter? For example, a Yerusha, where you have 2 neighbors, and the first wants privacy. Who does he have the right to privacy? He can force his neighbor to pay for the privacy if he wants it. His neighbor doesn't want it. It's not. There's no problem that's occurring. We're just talking about how, right? You build a lot of building companies. Build cusses, and as you can see, if you look at them, we didn't point it out, but like in Nashim, the Durham gets thrown into Nashim. If you look at all of the Masechtas, it's not really easily broken down into 6 categories. You're going to make 6 categories. So 55, and I had 8 that are sort of random, at least on a surface level. So they were put in, like in the Durham was put was put in before another, but after it's connected to the previous one. Subas, I think. After Subas, because the husband is able to be mounted in the Durham with his wife, and I think it talks about in the last parak. So they put another in the Durham, and then another got in as well. Obviously, we know that nothing is by mistake. Even a leaf turns over it. Hashem is, directing it fully. No question that there's more significance to it than that. But this is what the Rishonim give on the surface level explanation. Then we have Kachim. Oh, if I'm not mistaken, I think 36 or 35 or 37 of the Masechtas actually have Gemara. The rest don't. So they don't have entire. There's no Gemara at all. And in Israel, only brachas. Sorry. Oh, okay, yes, thank you. Right besides Finidus, so I guess entirety of Nida, and in Israel you have brachas. Entire some things connected to Tyro, brachas of Tyro. Okay, let's move along. So there's 63 Masechtas. There are 525 Progim, 4,224 Mishnayos. I saw discrepancy in that somewhere. It says some places it says 3,192. Some places it says the number 4,224. I wasn't going to go count them, but even I was working on Pirkei Avos, and I was doing something online, and they divided equally that our Pirkei Avos less Mishnayos, 2 to 1. They divide some of them into more. So there's obviously different their size. Pirkei Avos is in the Zikr. Yeah. Now the name of the parak does not reflect, again, obviously nothing happens by mistake, but on a surface level, the name of the parak does not reflect the content of the parak. Rather, it's the first word or words of the first Mishnah in that parak. So you open up brachas, and the first word is the name. The fourth parak it says Tzil Shachar. The name of the parak is Tzil Shachar. So it's just the first words. Elam Mitzvah Shalom, it's called Elam Mitzvah. Tamafkid, it's called Avir, it's called Amafkid. Amaniyah Chasakat, it's called Amaniyah. So on a simple level, take the first word or words. That's the name of this parak. This is just examples of where we see the name of the Prakim and how many Mishnayos are in each of these. We'll get to the Let's see that. This just shows over here, it's going through the number of prakim in each one. Now the short, just to get an idea, an average parak, Mishnayos, has 8 Mishnayos, around 8. That's the average, either a little more than 8 or a little less than 8, depending which number you go with, the 4224 or the 3192. It's right around 8. The shortest parak, then they have the average parak, the longest parak. So the shortest parak has 2 Mishnayos in it. However, only 3 prakim have 2 Mishnayos, and only 12 have 3. So out of all 525 prakim, except for 14 of them, the shortest one is at 4. You have a few exceptions over there. How many exceptions did we say? There's 14 exceptions out of 525, but otherwise you're talking about from 4 Mishnayos, let's say, at the bottom end. The longest parak is in Pirkei Avos. In general, Pirkei Avos has the longest prakim. Outside of Pirkei Avos, the longest one is 17. Pirkei Avos has a number that are more than 17. And in general, only 14 prakim, just like on the other end, there's 14 also here, there's only 14 prakim that have more than 15 Mishnayos. That means you talk about from 4 to 15 is your average parak. Making, if you do the math, it comes out to, like I said, a little bit more than 8 or right under 8 Mishnayos in your average parak. Okay, this goes through the order of why it was made this way, why for Israel, there's an explanation. We'll leave that. I think this goes through which ones have Gemara. I think this over here, you can see the bold ones have Gemara. Whichever ones are in bold have Gemara, the other ones are just Mishnayos. However, the Rambam writes it's not shocking. It's all self-understood. We're not missing understanding of those other Mishnayos. To learn Gemara, you constantly see it seems to go off track. Things are connected. The Rabbi are connected, all sorts of things. Things are connected, and they end up going to other discussions. But all of the things that are needed for other Masechtas are found in the ones that we have Gemara on them. Let's go back to the. So that's for Torah Shebeal Peh, and then we have the Gemara. So in the Gemara, basically the job of the Gemara is from when the Mishnayos was completed, the next 300 plus years, they studied Mishnayos, and that whole study was put together to Talmud Bavli. And what correct? And the job of the Gemara, like we said, there's a number of jobs. The Rabbi actually talks about a Gadata at great length. What's the significance of a Gadata? I think all of us know on some level there's certain things you can't communicate. Connection. There's certain things you can't communicate by talking to somebody, say story, some things come through. Example, he talks about how in a Gadata you have things in them that you cannot otherwise, you can't express them. You won't get communicated. You have to keep the that are found in them. Speaks about, I think, 3 or 4 things that Gemara does. Number one is it talks about the understanding of all the teachings in the Mishnayos, number 1. Number 2, it discusses and presents all the new teachings that came up. So sort of the same thing, but just with new teaching. Then there's the Agadah. He mentions one other thing. I don't remember right now what it is. Now let's look over here. We will just leave it for the next section. Let's leave it for the next section. Let's look at the Gemara test. So this is taken from a number of different sources, like I mentioned before, the Klali Hashan, a number of different firms that speak about this, and I organized it not in a way that I saw anywhere else, but it just seems one of the ways of presenting. So these are conceptually the different tasks of every Gemara. The first task in the Gemara is my. My means what is. So the Gemara says, for example, before we ask what's the source for this, what's the reason, why is it on the 14th, why is it la'er and there, not with an atupa, before we ask all those questions, we first have to know what the teaching is. It says, what's fire? Is that the J or the night? The Mishnah at the beginning of Bava Kama says, before we discuss why he organizes this way, Rabbi says 13 August is again. There's another one that says there's 24. Before we ask that, we first know what Mava is. What is Mava? The word is ask my Mava. We know what a shar is, we know what a bar is, we know what hever is, but what's Mava? That's, so to speak, the first task of the Gemara. Most of the time, the words have to do it. It was written in Lashon HaKodesh. People knew how to read Lashon HaKodesh. People know what the words mean. The second task, which is really the main part of Gemara, I'm just using the word dummy, is to determine what is this case. That's the biggest part of Gemara. We basically very often will even change our understanding of the case based on more information. So let's take an example. The beginning of Hamaniyah says, Hamaniyah is God, Rishus Rabbi, someone places a picture in the public area, Obaka, Reniskuba, Vishavro, other person comes, trips on it and breaks it, he doesn't have to pay for the damage that he caused. But what happens if he got injured in it? He started breaking it, he got injured. The owner of this barrel is high to pay for his injury. So if you learn it on a simple level, just read it and take it as what it says. Your understanding is the person walking in the street has no responsibility. The person who placed the item there has all the responsibility. But the Gemara asks, am I putter? Why is he putter? Why is the guy that broke it putter? He should look where he's walking. The person should look where they're walking. The Gemara gives 4 answers. The 3 of the answers, that's the premise of the question. You say you're right, you should look where he's walking. The person has to pay for it, he breaks it. So why does it say in the Mishnah is putter? That's called an ukimta. We establish when a teaching was put based on additional information, right? So you see something, and then you see another more information. It gives, so I misunderstood this. Based on additional information or questions, we realized that our understanding was incorrect. So it's talking about a unique case. Either it was dark, or it was right around the corner, or the whole area was full of barrels and there's no other way to go through. Then you actually allowed to do it purposefully. And the Gemara goes on to discuss those opinions. It's interesting. There's 3 there. The 4th answer is Ula Omar. Ula said the Marava Amri in the west. And whenever in the town of Babel, somebody came from somewhere, they came from Babel. In the west, there's a source to the west of Babel. Babel is like modern day Iraq by the Euphrates. So he says in the west they say the Fisha ain't dark and he says no, person walks, doesn't have to pay his pucker, like the Mishnah said. He should look where he's walking. No, people are walking. So I don't know if it's a word that I was thinking is we have it today in Rambam. The Rambam says when at the beginning of a meal, he says the Bnei Eretz Yisrael, it's when they do one thing. The people of Babel is when they open up their belt. They loosen their belt. That's when the meal starts. Because the Rambam says in the Rambam that you can't start a meal, some implement. But if you started, then you can continue. So what's considered starting the meal? One thing, I don't remember what. And a bubble, it's opening up the belt. Just thinking, the first 3 answers are all from Bubble. In Bubble, they were more worldly. And so they say you have to look where you're walking. And you say you have to look where you're walking. The ones in Eretz Yisrael, they were thinking about Torah. They weren't paying attention to the roads around them. That's the second task, and that's really the most part of the Gemara. So I'll just give some examples. The Gemara asks questions from higher sources, which we call a Meisvei. It asks contradictions, which is called a Raminu. It asks logic-based questions, which is a Maskif. And it's basically challenging and asking questions on this teaching of the Mishnah to see, did we understand it correctly? Did we really understand it? Has to do with this, has to do with that. We may say, those are not questions. That's talking about that. That's talking about this. That's talking about other things. And we're going to keep the Mishnah as it is. Or we may say, our Mishnah could be understood differently, has to be understood differently. Sometimes in a number of ways. And it was written on purpose that way, that it has a number of ways of understanding it. That's really when you say Gemara, the heavy learning that occurs in Gemara, you put into this category. The next category would be more a shiloh. You have push and shiloh. All the sparring, when they ask Allah, the shiloh, challenge. Ask no question, ask the shiloh, what do you do? They wanted to do. They didn't have any issues with anything. What's written in the Torah, they had to think in their own self. They wanted to get information. Those are shilohs and shuvas. So the first category would be more push. Something. Second one is shiloh inquiry. You go to information desk to ask for information. It's not a difficulty that's there. So an example of that would be the mucker. The Gemara can say, my crop, my kaima. Those would be some of the ways the Gemara asks, what's the reason, the source of this teaching? So it says, once we know exactly what the case of the Mishnah is, we know the words, we know the case. So now we know what the case is. The Gemara is going to inquire what is the source or reason for the teaching of the Mishnah. My crop, my kaima. We have those examples. Then the next one is not done very often in the Gemara itself. It's more done not even by Yishem, but more by Achronim, which is okay. I got the source. It says and there. We have this whole with him, and we determine that when you search for comments, you have to use a ner. So you learn it says Tippus over here, it says Tippus over there, and it says ner over here, ner over there, and we make this whole connection. That's the source. Fine, that's the source. But what's the reason? In other words, we have the source. We know that this is true. What's the hasbar? What's the understanding of it? So the Gemara by actually also goes that far. It says you use a torch, you can have a lot of problems. You can worry about fires. The torch actually doesn't light it up as well in small areas. All sorts of benefits to a candle over a torch. So that's why I put it. It said it's often related to the source and reason. Basically, they have a source like a bus, and the reason is the hasbar. So you have a source. Let's give another example. You have a source that if a person's climbing up a ladder and they trip and fall and kill somebody, they don't go to ghosts. They're going down the ladder, they fall and trip and kill somebody, they go to ghosts. How do we know? You have a question. What's the hasbara? The Rambam gives hasbara. When the person's going up, they have no reason to anticipate falling down. If they fell, it's per blindness. But when you're going down, by definition, what you're doing is you're going in a downward motion. What's your job? You're falling, but have a control fall. Pay attention. If you get hurt, you may fall on somebody else and hurt them, or Pastor Shalom, like it happened in that case. Person killed someone. So there's an element of negligence. They go to ghosts. So the source is the pasuk that uses the wording of derech nefila. And the hasbara is that's the Rambam gives. So again, this is not going to, you don't find this in every Gemara necessarily, and it's not even necessarily a task of the Gemara to determine, for example, who's the Tana. But it comes up in the discussion very often. Because one of the Tana is we compare to other people. So the next thing would be who's the Tana. Once we know the case of the Mishnah, its source, and the whole idea of it, so the Gemara will inquire who is the author of the teaching of the Mishnah. Here the Gemara will ask Man Tana. And after you're done that, you essentially know everything about the teaching. You understand exactly the cases, find the number of ways of understanding it. You know the source of the ways. You know the underlying reason for them. You know who the time of the Mishnah is. You know, learn the Mishnah. So the next two things are sort of outside of the Mishnah. One is I'm just using the word Tana Rabbanan. You actually have a lot of times throughout Shabbos, how many times it appears, but a lot of times these teachings are presented. Omar Rabbi, Omar Rav. A lot of the teachings are related teachings. So, for example, I know in Masik, the Mishnah says that there are two cases where Adam Zaymanin don't get the thing they try to impose on the other person. Usually, Adam try to get somebody killed, they get killed. The Mishnah says there are two cases where they don't get the same that punishment. They get malchus. One of them is if you try to say that somebody's a follow, a kohen, so the follow is not a good kohen. And the other one is they say somebody has to go to Ghost. They don't have to go to Ghost, and if the kohen doesn't become a follow, rather to get malchus. The Gemara presents Tana Rabbanan. There's four cases where they don't get the punishment. They get malchus. So it's a related teaching. The Gemara does not analyze why the Mishnah two in the four. The first we talk about it that these are the main ones. They include conceptually all the other ones, but it presents related teachings. And then finally, you have what's called an ibaylahu. So there's a number of examples of an ibaylahu, but just a simple way of putting it is the Mishnah said case Aleph is Chayim, case Beis is Pater, but between Aleph and Beis, so let's call them rather Aleph and Gimel, is a case in the middle. It's not as strict as this one, it's not as light and lenient as that one, which is Pater. The Gemara says ibaylahu. What about in this middle case? And you almost always goes, I don't know if there's an exception, basically me, I'm Reno, do say this, right? Or perhaps you say that. So sometimes the Gemara says, Tashma, come in here and answer to your question. But most of the time, the Gemara says, take. Now, I think there's a misconception about what take means. So we know take means as the Rosh Hashanah, Tishki, Parrots, Kushis, Abayis, Tishki, Tishki will answer Kushis, difficulties that we have, and Abayis, inquiries that we have. For this Kushis and Shilas. But the literal translation of Teku means let it stand. Meaning, in other words, I think when we learn an Ibaylahu and we have a Tashma, we feel better than if we have a Teku. I think maybe the opposite is true. Tashma is more difficult to understand than a Teku. Why? Because what's the Ibaylahu? Ibaylahu is saying there's two ways of looking at it. There's two ways of looking at it. The Teku is right. There are two ways of looking at it. Very good. And there's no determination that we should rule one way over the other. It's confirming the question. How do you pass him? So that's a different question. What do you do in general when you pass him? So it'll depend. If it's monetary, that's not a question. That's what. How do you pass him? That's what you have to pass it anyway. Without the crowd shots. How do you pass him? The question more is the tashma. Tashma coming here to answer. Rabbi Yechon said, "This is Allah." Why did Rabbi Yechon say that? This is the way to look. Why did Rabbi Yechon choose one over the other? So in a way, the take was more understandable than the tashma. I think that's the end of this section. Okay, so we have one more part over here. In the Gemara in general, you have teachings. Teachings will be either from Tanayim, will be a Mishnah, or both the Tnan, Tnan is a Mishnah, Tana Rabbanan, and Tanya is a Brisa. As we brought that, I think, from the Shema, that the difference between Tana Rabbanan and Tanya is that the Brisas that everybody knew are more accepted, more well known. The Gemara says Tana Rabbanan, Rabbi's point. The ones that were once well known, the Gemara says Tanya. And then you also have a Mamaroim that's presented with, it's called a member, it's presented also with Itmar. Itmar was said. Then you have in questions, like we said, you have difficulties called a Kushya. We said the three examples from a higher authority is a Mesve, a contradiction is called a Reminu, and a logical question is called a Maskif. And then you have the inquiries called the Shela. And then for the answer, an answer for a Kushya is called the Tiritz, a Tiritz, and to a Shela, it's a Tshuva. And then you have a proof. The Gemara will present proofs. Tanya Nami Hachi, Kit the Tanya, Deka Nami Diktani. This is an accurate explanation. So that would be different tasks that you find in the Gemara. You'll do the other section over here, Gemara page. So here you have a page of Gemara. So you just go through it quickly. You have the name of the Masechta, then you have the number of the Perek, then you have the name of the Perek. This is the very beginning of Brachas. On the left side, you have the Daf and the Amud. Then we have, in the middle, you have the Mishnah, and then afterwards the Gemara. The Gemara always starts with the Gimel and a Mem and an apostrophe. The Mishnah, the way it starts, is the Perek. The beginning of the Masechta, the beginning of the Perek, or the middle of the Perek. The beginning of the Masechta, so you have this big word and a nice box. If it's the beginning of if it's in the beginning of a Perek, not the Masechta, it's going to have the word a little bigger. Here you have a shleisha, it's a little larger. It also always comes after the Hadron Allah, Eitan Avarchim, the previous Perek. And if it's in the middle of a Perek, it just says must have just like the Gimel Mem with the apostrophe. You have a Mem, Sof, Nun, Yud with the apostrophe, which stands for Matznitzin, which means Mishnah in Aramaic. Let's see a little more than, we'll go to Rashi Tesis, then we'll go beyond that. On the inner part, you have Rashi. I don't know where it comes from. I remember hearing, told us two things about this. I don't know what the source for it is. Could be there's, I'm not sure where it comes from. One thing he said that every page has the top 4 lines of Rashi and Tesis, which means you have to review everything 4 times. And I don't know if okay. I'm not sure if that confirms that it's true or it is. Right. And that Tesis is on the outer edge. So if the Sefer gets worn out, you can still learn. Without Tesis, you can still manage. Without the Rashi, you can't learn without Rashi. Okay, let's look at it with a little more detail. So like we said, you have over here, Brachas, this indicates the name of the Masechta. The name of the Seder is not indicated on the page. You have to figure that out yourself. It says Bava Bava, Bava Mitzvah, Zikr. Over here, it indicates the name of the Perek. And we have the number of the Perek. Then we have the top of the Amud. We went through this. Then you have the Chanaya, like we said, it's in the Ravidanasi in the year 3949 or 3948. Then you have the Gemara, like we said, in the year 4260, Ravina and Ravashi. Then we have Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi is the most basic and most learned church. He lived around the year 4800, which, if I'm not mistaken, is right at the beginning of the Rishonim. The Goyim and Sabarim go like up to that year, if I'm not mistaken. And then you have Tosfos. They're written, so to speak, in addition to Rashi. They were the Rashi students. Sorry? It's just which I took this is the Gemara over here. This is the inner, this is where the binding is. This is the outside of the page. If it's Amud Aleph, you can tell Amud Aleph and Amud Beis which way it would be. Tosfos will basically always be by the page number. So the page number is on the outside. See over here on this side. The other side will have the page number reversed. So Tosfos were Rashi students as well as his students. Many of them were Rashi's grandchildren, like Rashbam, Rivam, Rabbi Tam, who were sons of Rashi's daughter Yocheved. They lived around 4860, 60 years later after Rashi. I think still in the lifetime of Rashi, but they were later. Okay, so go a little outside of that. This is not an order of the time, but order of how you're going to learn it. I was showing this presentation to somebody who never saw Gemara before, and they were overwhelmed by all these things on the page. A lot of things on the margin. Sometimes it's hard, keeping your finger over here, and then the Rashi is on very sabah, and you're running out of fingers. But I think in a way, if it was in the back of the Gemara, it'd be even more difficult. It's all there, so you can have them there to help you. These are the basics that have to be in place. So over here, you have 3 things that were done by Rabbi Yeshua Bayas, who lived, you can see over here, around 500 years ago. he put three things in the Gemara. Number one, in the older Gemaras, remember, it's called Hashalim because they added. It used to be in the margins over here. The Gemara says the Chsiv, the Hoffinger, the Amar Kram. Where's this pasuk? I don't know where it is. So he basically put in the margins Shmois Pavav. Go to Shmois Pavav and go look for the pasuk. Now they call it Torah Hashalim, and they, instead of putting it in the margins, which makes it even more things on the page, they have each one has some are Rashi letters, some are Rashi letters with parentheses, some are regular letters, some are regular letters with brackets. You can figure out which one is Agay Sabach, which one is Torah Hashalim, each one of them you figure it out. So he put the psukim. Another thing that he put over there, that's what it says, the Torah was authored by Rabbi Shebeal. It references any psukim quoted in the Gemara. Others later added to it, and here it actually brings the psukim themselves. Some Gemaras today, some don't, some do. Another thing that he put in is ein mishpat and ner mitzvah. So I would use that example. I actually have over here pages, but I'm not going to give them out. But if let's say you open up the Mishnah in Tilsa Shachar, it says in the Mishnah, Tilsa Shachar, after place. When it says Adal Chase, right before the first Adal Chase, there's a big letter. I think it was the Dalit. Not sure what the letter was. It's telling you where you can find this on halacha. That means you're not going to find Adal Chase in halacha anywhere. Halacha is there. Stam chapters before 4 hours into the day. Stam for halacha, even if the daven in the first 4 hours, even if a person purposely doesn't, as long as it's before Chatzos, they can still daven. Usually, this is on purpose to pass the time. You can't daven. The only exception is chakras, and it says the reason is because by all of the tefillas, once the time of the tefillah passed, now it's time for a new tefillah. By the only time that's not a time for a tefillah is between the end of chakras and mincha. Mincha starts at midday or half an hour after. Question about that. And chakras ends 4 hours into the day. So a person even purposefully missed chakras, then I'm talking about Shulchan Aruch halacha. Even a person purposefully missed chakras, they can still daven afterwards. They don't get stars tefillah, but the stars tefillah they have. So if you want to see if something is that the halacha, if there's no letter there, that means you can't find this written anywhere in halacha. He references the Rambam, Mag, Torah, and Shulchan Aruch. That's what he references over there. And the third thing that he did is the Maseres Hashas, and he basically, if there's a similar Taisvis, and very often it's similar, but then when you look at it, it's not exactly similar. So he references related Gemaras for this one. So you're going to learn a Taisvis, and then you don't fully understand it. And say, oh, there's the Maseres Hashas. You go to the Taisvis, he writes a much greater length. Oh, I understand it. So those are the three things that he added on into the Gemara page. And then besides that, we have the Agay Sabach. Those are pretty famous. He basically places corrections. Sometimes you're going to read, I think that there are 3 things, and then the Mishnah starts counting them, it says 4. So he'll tell you there's a girsa that says 4. Whatever it is, there's a girsa that doesn't include the last one. Whatever it is, he basically brings corrections to the text that are found in other places of other texts of the Shas, other sites. And then over here you have the Gillian Shas, which is Rabbi Kiva Eger. He throws a question and they just leave it like that. Very cryptic, very short, written very in short. And the question doesn't come along with an answer. And that's all found in Gemara. So that's basically covers. And that's the end of the presentation.